we're going to say quarterback purgatory. They might be in quarterback hell in reality.
I think overall, though, most important position, Steelers are 27th best, and I'm being kind. Welcome back to episode 20 of Out of Town Yinzers. I'm Joe alongside Justin. We're longtime Pittsburgh fans, but no longer living in Pittsburgh. Today we're talking Steelers, Pirates, and Pens. But we have to start with Steelers and the quarterback situation. We've talked a lot about it so far, but now it's official. Aaron Rodgers is coming back to Pittsburgh. Is this a good thing for the Steelers?
Yeah, so I mean, you know this, but anyone listening doesn't know this. We were literally on our golf trip. I was surrounded taping shorts with other AFC North fans when the news broke. So I was literally talking to Browns, Bengals, and Ravens fans right when the news broke. So it was interesting timing. Yeah, there's a lot of opinions, not just from Steelers fans. There's a lot of opinions from opposing fans for sure about this. Ironically, the funny thing I was thinking about, we really didn't talk about the quarterback position a ton until the last couple weeks. Of course, the news keeps breaking, so we have no choice to talk about it. This goes back, I think this in general goes back to a lot of what we were talking about before. If you are looking at this through a lens of, are the Steelers going to be better this year because of this signing? I don't think there's really any question. They're better off with Rodgers, in the lineup on the roster. Would I prefer them go a different route? Yes, but I don't know if there's really a great argument to say, oh, they'd be better off this year if there was no Aaron Rodgers versus the choices they have. I do think it's worth pointing out. We talked about this months ago. I do think they went after Kyler Murray. I think they would have preferred him to come there, but I'm not going to blame him for going to the Vikings. Malik Willis would maybe be the one that I'm not so sure about if they even really made a play for him. But what's your take? Are they better off with Aaron Rodgers on the roster?
Yeah, I mean, I've been flip-flopping back and forth on this for weeks. I think you phrased a good question overall when it comes to the Steelers, and I think this is probably the right take on it, and that's Steelers relative to other teams when it comes to the quarterback room. Kind of which way would you go, one way or the other? And I only had two teams that they were definitely better than, and that would be the Jets with Geno and the Browns with Deshaun and Shador. And I even had to hesitate on Deshaun Watson for a second, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I feel like those are the two definites, and then there's a chunk of 7 other teams that I think you could make some arguments. So that was Malik Willis with the Dolphins, Daniel Jones, Tyler Shuck with the Saints, the lefties with the Falcons with Tua and Penix, Bryce Young, if you're a believer or not, and Jacoby Brissett, Carson Beck combination. I feel like those are all the tier that the Steelers are at, but that is absolutely the bottom third tier. So it's hard to be excited, even though you do think the Steelers will be a better team, have a better record with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback than with a Will Howard as well.
Yeah, so just to give some background on where this question came, this is actually good. So someone said in our comments to one of our, like we've talked about many times, some of the comments that come through on quarterbacks are wild. Someone did say the Steelers have one of the best quarterback rooms with Aaron Rodgers, and this was 2 weeks ago before he signed. I saw that comment, I was like, okay, there's certain things you can't respond to. There's no way to do it. But it made me think, okay, you don't think about things that way. Obviously, we're not looking at it anywhere close to that. But you hear something like that, and you're like, well, where would we really rank it? So, like Joe pointed out, I really don't think, if you're looking at it, there's 2 ways to look at this. So you can look at it, one, what teams would the Steelers trade their quarterback room straight up for? And that's pretty much what you covered at first. I think there's only 4 that there's even discussion. You mentioned Cleveland and New York Jets. Maybe the Jets do it just because they have really no answer whatsoever, and there's no answer beyond this year either. So like, well, obviously the Jets they're not going to take Rodgers back, but they're in the exact same boat. And Cleveland, to your point, the only other ones I think you're actually trading or even considering, and they wouldn't do it either. I don't think Miami's doing it. They would have, I don't see that. Arizona, those are the only 4 that I even think there's a question. That's straight up. You're looking at the reality. you named all the ones. If you look at it maybe from more of a 1 year, like, hey, let's look at this only 1 year. The future doesn't matter. I think you pointed out all the same teams. I had pretty much all the same ones: Minnesota, Atlanta, maybe the Giants if Dart in shock if they're not what we think they are. Those and Carolina, Tennessee, Las. It's the same. It's just young guys. You're certainly not they're certainly not trading. None of those teams are even they're hanging the phone up if you call about. So what are we really talking about here? We're talking about the 28th through 30th quarterback room in the league, depending on how you want to look at it. You could maybe push them up a little higher. And I don't even think Rodgers necessarily played terrible with the people around him, but that's just reality. If you really go through it, because that's the problem. Is some people make these statements like, "Oh, they're good or they're bad." Well, qualify that. Go through the teams and tell me who's trading their quarterback room for ours, or vice versa. I understand the optimism, but this is reality at this point. No matter how you want to look at it, you can make the argument, you can phrase it multiple ways. This is we're going to say quarterback purgatory. They might be in quarterback hell in reality. I mean, it just depends on how you want to look at it, whether you want to take a short-term or a long-term approach.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the same reason why I was trying to say, hey, take some swings because it gives some depth potentially to a quarterback room. Maybe you hit on something, but I love the aspect and kind of the question of the other team in the NFL. Would they trade any quarterback room for the
I mean,
Steelers?
who's doing that?
And I think that the Jets would be the only roster you'd kind of make that argument, and they obviously wouldn't do it with Aaron Rodgers. So there
Right.
really is not one that would do that.
Cleveland probably just
And
for the money. Like, I guess you could argue because of money, like maybe there's a path there. But I mean, yeah, it really they got a Pro Bowler on their quarterback room though. We got to remember that too. So there's that aspect there.
So
Um,
I think this is kind of where we should just stop here is just say, hey, the Steelers are
yeah,
exactly where they are when it comes to the quarterback. This is the best of a really bad situation. So I realistically, if I went back through, I would say they have the 27th best quarterback room this year. If you asked the this year question, so I would put them over Jets, Browns, Falcons, Cardinals, and probably Vikings with Kyler. But Kyler could certainly be much better than that in terms of stats. Just in terms of winning,
well, he
I'm
will.
not
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, he
But
probably will be with stats just because of what's around him. I do. I mean, the way to sum this up, and this is going to be a throwback from this. There's people probably listening that don't even remember any of these players, but Jim Miller, Mike Tomczak, Cordell, that quarterback room, it feels like, and Cordell had a lot of upside, when at that point, but that quarterback battle, and I know there's not a battle right now, but we're in that same purgatory type situation. And in reality, that team wouldn't have traded their quarterback room for this team because they had Cordell, with some high upside, as Joe certainly knows. Joe was a Cordell guy. But that's where we are. Like, I know people don't want to, again, they don't want to qualify it or don't want to actually look at it. And we're in the same quarterback purgatory as we were back then. One of my first memories of like understanding rosters and quarterback battles and things like that. That's unfortunately where we are again.
no, there really was kind of a whole couple generations there from Terry Bradshaw to Ben Roethlisberger of players where the Steelers were just in quarterback purgatory, and we are already, what is it, 4 years into that now? That I
Yeah.
would say. So those years add up fast. It stinks that these years are happening the same time the Pens are
Yeah.
coming off a generational player with Crosby. So it's just one of those times in Pittsburgh. But the Steelers are kind of what they are. I think what would be fun is, in the next few weeks, let's do the same thing with the other position groups. Let's give them a chance
Yeah.
and kind
Yep.
of build their overall rankings at the end and kind of come back and do a summary of the whole team. So I think overall, though, most important position, Steelers are 27th best, and I'm being kind.
Right. Again, it doesn't mean they won't get production. I think some people having this argument in national media are, maybe underselling what Rodgers could be with some better receivers, but it's still reality. It is what it is.
No, absolutely. And unfortunately, for Pittsburgh, the topic we're moving from the Steelers to is the Pirates. So we have kind of talked a lot about them, but not all at once when it comes to them. And I feel like they need a little bit of space here to talk through kind of this little turmoil that's coming in middle of May. So April was good as expected. They had a lot of home games though, so it was setting up for a month where they should have been able to stack some wins. They got swept by the Cardinals a few weeks ago. 4-game series kind of looked bumpy. Now they got swept again by the Phillies. They're losing tonight to the Cardinals. We're taping on Tuesday night.
We are
So
winning now. It's
Justin,
like when we start
oh,
taping
they're
that
winning.
our
Oh,
yeah, our
all
teams
right.
just we just need to tape when games are on because our team score four runs, 4 goals in a
Well, hell
period
yeah.
while we're taping. But
So
yeah.
maybe, like we said kind of earlier, maybe it's just so early, things are going to flip flop. But is there any reason to be concerned about the Pirates and kind of our rosiness that we had a few weeks ago, or really all season so far?
So again, I'm a big proponent in baseball. We basically just saw a couple series of a football entire season, but at the same time, it's almost like the strengths are starting to pull back a little bit right now. I mean, just looking at the strengths, you had Skeens and Keller basically have one bad inning across, one and a half bad inning or two and a half bad innings across 2 games, and it cost them, 2 games against the Rockies and the Phillies. Again, it's just this team. I do think they're still sixth in runs, 11th in total ERA. That's largely because the bullpen ERA is 17th, and the bullpen is still costing them 10 blown saves at this point in the season is not good. That's ridiculous. I think they are going to need to make a they're going to need to make a move in the bullpen sooner rather than later. So like the strength of the starting pitching, it pulls back a little. It's almost like they needed to capitalize on what they were doing earlier in their season relative to their record, but it is still baseball. One series, this is a big week. They've got, 3 games with the Cardinals, 4 against the Cubs and the Blue Jays sandwiched in the middle there. This is a very big week for them. I don't like to, you know, over exaggerate any one week in a baseball season, but this feels like this is a pretty big one for them.
Yeah, it definitely is a long season. There would be plenty of time to claw back if things really took a turn the next couple weeks. But this is kind of the teetering point. Is you want to be able to not go on that losing streak and make sure you're still kind of winning series or winning games and staying afloat. And that's not what they've been doing over the past 10 games overall. And really, some of the cracks that need to be their strength are starting to show up. So that starting pitching that we talked about, Skeens, has been absolutely amazing. You can not ask anything more of him.
Mm-mm.
He had a little bit of a rough inning that last start, and really the last turn through the rotation for everybody's been not great, and particularly like a Bubba Chandler. So that's someone that you're
Yeah.
really hoping on. You don't want to sell off on, but he has not been good the last 6 starts, and it's costing them. They're owing the last 6 of his starts too. So when you kind of have that person every fifth day that's just not performing in the starting rotation, kind of bumps everyone back. And then, like you said, the probably the most glaring problem with the Pirates is the bullpen. It's one of those things where, say what you will about Neil Huntington back in the day and, the Chris Archer trade on the way out the door. He was almost always able to build bullpens. And that 2013, 14, 15 team was built as a pitching staff around the bullpen and having a really dominant back end of the bullpen. The Pirates don't have anywhere close to that right now.
Mm-mm.
And really, it was kind of wishful thinking going into the season that they would. When you got someone like Dennis Santana as your closer, who's been DFA'd 3 times himself,
Yeah.
Gregory Soto, who's your biggest free agent signing, and really not much else. That I would say half the other people on the roster have been DFA'd within the last 2 years from another team as well. So it's just kind of bits and pieces and that's sometimes how you build a bullpen because you just want guys that can kind of throw hard and pick up some innings. But it's been rough, and there really isn't anyone that they can turn to close down a game right now. Gregory Soto has been exactly what you wanted, but he's just one guy back there. So they need more
Yeah.
depth. And it's just not coming right now from anybody on
No.
their current roster or what's in AAA.
Right. And yeah, even Soto, like ask Oriole fans what they think about Gregory Soto. They some of these guys, it's almost like it's not the worst thing. If you're gonna cut corners anywhere, and you're gonna have to if you're the Pirates with their, roster and salary and everything, there's bullpen is so hard to depend on year to year, but it's almost like there's some regression to where these guys probably should be if you're looking at how they built their bullpen. This is probably the most likely outcome or right around this. So we were kind of just hoping there would be there was always variance with the bullpen. We were just hoping, we would get a little lucky with the bullpen. It's probably about what it should be. If you look at we just did with quarterback. If you do that with bullpen, they're probably about, they're probably pitching about where they should be in the grand scheme of things, and it's costing them obviously now. Yeah, in even 17th, they probably should have won a few more games than they did, but it happens to be in these high pressure situations. So the one other thing too, the injuries, that O'Hearn injury, it sounds like it could be a little longer than, I think he's on the 10-day IL, but it could be longer. I don't
It'll be
know
a
that I
month
really love
plus for
their,
sure.
yeah, yeah. I don't know that I love their, we talked about it too with their hitting. It's, you see a series like this past week, and that's what you've seen, like 8 runs one game and then they get shut out 2 straight games. That's the concern with the hitting is, yes, they're 6th in runs, scored, but they have had some chunk games where they're scored 12, plus, and they'll be facing these position players. And I do think that's fluffed up the stats from the hitting side a little bit. I don't know how at this point, Lau has hit 2+ home runs in 3 games, and they're 0-3 in those games. So there's some weird stuff playing out, as it always does in baseball, but it is frustrating. Would you, at this point, with where they're at record wise, would you have taken that before the season?
Their record right now, so like one game over 500 in
Yeah,
mid-May.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when you're a Pirates franchise and where they are, you just want
We're
them to battle through the season, get to August
right.
when you're relevant, and then see what happens.
Yeah, that and I think some of the negativity, just again, I get it. We're in the middle of, like, when you zoom out, some of the negativity right now is largely based around the division. It's just been so good. I get
That's
it right
true.
now. I'm right with anyone who's negative about them right now and has some concerns, because we're right in the middle of it. But it is baseball. We really this is a very important week. Don't want to overemphasize any one week, like I said, but I do think this is a very important, or 10 days or whatever it is, for them.
Yeah, it's much more important to close out the season than how you're playing in mid-May. So it's you just got to trend up and wash it off, as they say, and move along. You still have the Jared Jones bump that we've been talking about coming in the next few weeks. With O'Hearn down, it really opens up a spot and some swings for a Pascual Garcia or an Esmeralin Valdez to come up and see if they can kind of catch fire. And those are guys that you're going to want on your team long term in a corner outfield center field position. So, there's some positives you can take from an O'Hearn injury. You can't have 2 of those, but I think the roster is deep enough that they should be able to survive this one as long as the pitching holds up. I feel like the bullpen is probably the biggest thing that's costing them games, just because
Mhm.
they can't close out games that they should win with the lead, and not even just hanging on to 1-run games, but blowing multiple runs late in games with 5, 6, 7, 8 outs left in the game.
Right.
All right, Justin. So I think that's a good place to wrap the Pirates then, and we can kind of move on to the Penguins. You kind of called out the talking a little bit about the coach side. So why don't you tee this kind of Penguins segment up for us?
Yeah, so we'll pivot back to, I wanted to, we keep all these things, all this news keeps breaking right after we talk about. We were just talking about Malkin last week. We'll pivot back to that, but I do want to start with, so the two big, it's award season, unfortunately for the Penguins at this point. But so Muse is up for, he is a finalist for the Coach of the Year award, which again kind of expected. We assumed him and Dubas, like, I was thinking one of the two, depending on how, like, worst case scenario, one of the two is going to end up in the final three. Was a little surprised that Dubas didn't end up in GM of the year. You had Verbeek with Anaheim, Colorado's GM, and then Bill Guerin actually up for it. Those were the three finalists. I'm sure he was right there in voting. I didn't see the numbers, or where he ended. I'm sure he's right there. Some of this sometimes can be, depending on how you look at the roster, having a coach and a GM. It's almost, sometimes they can kind of cancel each other out a little bit, which I think is a little bit of what this was. Because you could argue, like Buffalo, for example, it's looking like Lindy Ruff is going to win, Coach of the Year, Jack Adams. I would just, same deal. Like, he was actually there last year and they were not good. So it's looking like he's going to win. Cooper with Tampa almost seems like just a longevity type thing. They did deal with a lot of injuries. He's the second highest odds, and Muse is a pretty distant third. But again, I think that says a lot. I think in general, just wanted to talk about Muse a bit here. Overall, going from think it was 80 points last year to 98. That's a big swing, not quite as big as Lindy Ruff in Buffalo, which I understand why he's likely going to win it or is going to win it. But even just things that the news when they brought Muse in, the reason people were excited was about his ability to develop players. I don't think anyone thought there was a turnaround coming like this, and he would have any type of an impact on the ice today like he had. And we've talked about it before. There is a lot to be said for sometimes when you pivot in hockey, just, you're seeing it even in baseball with like Mattingly with the Phillies. Sometimes it just gives teams a kick they need, but a lot of the things that I've heard, a lot of the stories, like I think the Steelers or the Steelers, I think the Penguins may have found a legitimate coach in Muse, and I'm excited to see the development that they're going to need. I mean, that's apparently his strength. So I just wanted to call him out. He'll likely finish third in the voting. I was a little surprised, like we talked about, that Dubas, especially we've really been talking about some of the moves they've made and things like that. But I do think a lot of it is sometimes when you have a coach and a GM, they probably cancel each other out. And I think Muse over Dubas is probably the right call in terms of finishing top three.
Yeah, no, and I kind of had the follow up question on just kind of Muse as a year two guy. What do we think about Muse? I think for Muse as a coach of the year aspect, they really won the majority of their games this year on the backs of veteran guys. So as someone that, is touted for youth movement and being able to coach up the young guys, outside of Kindle, there wasn't really anybody else that was kind of an outstanding younger aspect of that roster. There's certainly some people kind of on the lower end, but the people who are driving the bus and the reason why they were second place in the Metro and, favored to win in the first round was because of guys 33, 34 plus, really. And that's one of those things that I feel like I'm even hesitant to call it a turnaround for the Pens because it could almost be just a flash in the pan kind of 1 year type
Right.
deal. When you think of, an Anthony Mantha being someone that was dominant and scoring a ton of goals, how likely is that going to happen next season
Right.
for the Pens? So I feel like the rubber really meets the road for Muse next year and go forward when he has to actually start to incorporate some of the talent that has been bubbling up in the system. So if you think of kind of the Horcrux or the Zonin coming through, or the Rucker McGrody, or who, you
Even
could
the
throw out some
goaltending.
other names
Yeah.
that are coming. You have some legit names that are actually coming through that'll play minutes as a younger team. And I think it'll be interesting to see how he does as a coach there. And I feel like if he's going to win Coach of the Year, it's going to be because he wins it with his own players and not with kind of a roster that was mostly a holdover from before his time, that he was able to kind of rally for one more go.
Yeah, I think the voting kind of, backs up what you're saying. Like the Penguins made the playoffs, and like you said, the backs of some of the older guys. And I would, you didn't make this point, but I would disagree with anyone who says this a little bit in that, some of the older guys that they signed, that they were guys they signed or brought in, and with Mantha, you mentioned Mantha, but you're right. Like that's why I'm excited about Muse, honestly, is because this is anything that was going to happen year one, probably even into year two with him was probably just a bonus in general. So the fact that they did what they did and he got them, because let's be honest, a lot of guys, he's a younger coach, doesn't have head coaching experience. I was a little surprised they went that direction. I didn't mind it. I understood it, but the fact that he got them to buy in, some of these older players to buy in, I think says a lot. That's just why I'm optimistic about him, moving forward. Was that he got the buy-in, and that's apparently not even his strength. So I think that bodes well for him in general.
No, I agree. I think he did everything you expected to and
Oh
more.
yeah. Yep.
It's just one of those that I feel like it was a weird year, so the jury's still out.
Right.
So
That's fair.
we'll see
Yep.
kind of how it goes.
Right.
All right, you had a great idea to kind of wrap the show today with a nod to Memorial Day coming up and some crossover with Pittsburgh and the military, and kind of compiled at least the two main people we'd be thinking about. But what was your take on kind of that aspect and anyone you want to call out?
Yeah, so this sort of came out of the whole Heidenreich signing and all that news has been all over the place. Such a cool story as everyone knows. So I wanted to come up with. I'm sure anyone in the comments, you let me know. I'm sure we're forgetting people, not trying to forget anyone or anything like that, but kind of threw this together. I had a long car ride out to Joe's golf tournament, so I listened to a lot of Alejandro Villanueva stories and on the way out. So we'll get to him in a second, but I mean, what an incredible life story to say the least. So we'll touch on him in a second. But so like you said, I wanted to call it three names, kind of coming from Heidenreich, just players in Pittsburgh that had a military background or served in the military. All three happened to serve. One I didn't know. This is more of like, I don't know what's called an honorary, honorable mention, but Kevin Green. I did not know he was in the reserves for something like 14 years in the offseason. I think something to do with, I'm assuming cavalry with tanks. But yeah, I didn't know that. That was a pretty cool story. I kind of stumbled upon was Kevin Green spending a bunch of off seasons in the reserves, even dating back to college. And then the two obvious ones. I think any real Pittsburgh fan is going to know is that these happen to all be Steelers. The first, Rocky Blyer. I think everyone knows of this one at this point. But so he fought in Vietnam in the late 60s. There was actually a 1980 TV movie, like a made-for-TV movie that was made about him, which I did not know. They and knew of this story, but he thought he might not even walk again, let alone play football again, from an injury that he got the Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. Ended up being a four-time Super Bowl champion, as we all know. So pretty crazy story in general. With him fighting in Vietnam. Again, I knew pieces of this, and there's more to it than that, but didn't know like a TV movie was made, from his story. Just imagine going from thinking he might never even walk again, or certainly not play football, to four-time Super Bowl champion, which was pretty wild. And then I think the more recent one that everyone knows, like I just talked about, Alejandro Villanueva. I knew of some of these stories. I can't even go into his entire backstory. There's a lot of stuff I was not aware. He essentially was born in Mississippi. His parents are both from Spain. Sort of grew up around like NATO schools in Europe. It fell into football essentially because of that and ended up loving football and playing late. I actually think, and you're listening to all this and listening to him talk about playing, we'll get into a little bit more here in a second, but there's a Max Ahanachour like tie-in here with how he was talking on the one podcast I was listening to about how much more athletic he felt just because of his upbringing with soccer, playing basketball, like playing all the European sports. But he just felt like it gave him such an upbringing. And it reminded me exactly of what we were talking about with the Ahanachour. So that's a whole different, path. We're not going to go down here, but I thought that was interesting call out. But yeah, crazy story. So 3 tours in Afghanistan, went straight through the U.S. Army. And he jumped all around. I mean, he's huge. So like they weren't sure where to put him. Played receiver, tight end, DM, really more tight end and receiver at Army. If you know Army at that time, they were running the ball like crazy. So he was a receiver, but probably more of a tight end. And again, same deal with his upbringing. He has a crazy way he made it to the league. So not only did he do those tours, and this is his words, not mine, but he actually made it to the league via a tryout that he called, this is his words, a Ponzi scheme. So essentially he even said, yeah, went to this tryout, had a friend that was kind of setting it up, or had to tie to it. I'm going to this tryout with 400 guys who are paying $300 just to do the tryout. And they're like bartenders. Meanwhile, he hasn't played football in 5 years, takes a crazy path from there. I definitely encourage people, especially this week, to go and listen to his story. But just an absolutely wild story. Was taking classes at Carnegie Mellon. His goal was, well, I just hope if I catch on like and make enough money on a practice squad, I can get my MBA paid for. And didn't want to tell anyone he was taking classes at Carnegie Mellon because they thought they might think he was like, they might hold it against him, and he's going to the game. He's getting a free ticket and taking I think his brother, or either way, he was taking someone with the games. Like, it was awesome. I got to learn Pittsburgh culture, drink Iron City and, sit in the stands for games. Meanwhile, I'm like on the practice squad and about to become the starter at tackle. So just a really cool story in general. I'm only touching on like the highlights. And this is directly from the Kelsey podcast. They called him the most interesting man in the world, like the Dos Equis guy. He is. I mean, you just listen to his story. It's crazy. And I'm just touching on the highlights. So wanted to call some of that out. Just perfect timing with Memorial Day. And his story is he's the embodiment of the American dream.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's just a great way, and it's nice that you can make a little Pittsburgh tie to some
Yeah.
really, really quality people
Yep.
on those 3 on that list. All right, well, I appreciate anyone who's still hanging around. Make sure you like and subscribe. We'll see you next Wednesday.
See you later.